And hello and welcome to this edition of Phillies Talk Podcast. It's your weekly podcast talking all about the Philadelphia Phillies, one of the longest running podcasts that are independent, talking about the fightin' Phils. Well, the Phillies fared very well going into the All-Star break, as we were talking about on the last show. They were the hottest team in baseball as we pulled into the All-Star game, and of course, with that All-Star game, the American League came out victorious on top, so they'll be getting the home field advantage when the World Series starts up in 2016. Very much a mystery who those teams will be so far in this year's World Series. We've got a long way to go, a couple of months, solid months left of baseball, even though we have more than half of the season in the books already. Taking a look around the standings, as of the night I'm doing this podcast, towards the end of July, another 9 days left in the month here, every National League team going into tonight's contests are tied with 57 wins apiece. So you can see the parity that has developed around the National League with teams becoming very good. Of course, the Washington Nationals leading in the East, the Chicago Cubs in the Central, and the San Francisco Giants out west in the NL West. So it's very much a coin toss at this moment who you would think might become your contestants in the 2016 World Series. Looking at the American League, yeah, it's about the same situation. A big surprise with Boston climbing their way back up to the top of the American League East. They're in a virtual dead heat with Baltimore as of the time I'm doing this podcast. They finally caught up to those red-hot Orioles. The Cleveland Indians, probably the surprise of the whole season so far with their bawdy 30-22 record on the road, 26-16 at home. They're leading the Central in the American League. And over in the West, it's Texas. They've virtually taken over the West. They are now 3.5 games above the Houston Astros as of the time that I'm doing this podcast. Well, where does that leave the Phillies, you ask? Well, they're about 9 games behind 500 right now. If they were to make 500, I think a lot of fans would be happy. 13 games back off the pace of those Washington Nationals. So wild card dreams at this point, very much a long shot for the Phillies. They're 8 games back in the wild card, nearing the end of July here. But stranger things have happened. Maybe some planets will align and they'll draw closer. But for now, since the All-Star break, they've been sort of 50-50. They'll win a game, lose 2 games, win 2 games. So they've been not on that pace that they entered going into the All-Star break so far. The big questions, of course, who might be moving from the Phillies at the trade deadline? Of course, very much a mystery as well. As of the time I'm doing the podcast, the hottest name being circulated around is Jeremy Hellickson. He's got 3 teams pursuing him, apparently, from what's been reported. The Pittsburgh Pirates, also the Baltimore Orioles looking at Hellickson, and the Boston Red Sox. So no doubt that the teams in the hunt for the playoffs are looking to bolster their lineups. I wouldn't even discount maybe the Mets even possibly thinking of a Hellickson. They certainly have a lot of tradable type players for a quality pitcher like Hellickson. So if they were to shore up their starting rotation that's taken a few hits over the last couple weeks, perhaps they will be in a better run to make the final push here in 2016. Other name being circulated as of the time of this podcast is Jimar Gomez, the Phillies' converted closer, and that's a surprise to me that the Phillies would actually think about trading Gomez at this point. Closers are kind of hard to get, as we saw with Jonathan Papelbon. Was making a ton of money with the Phillies. I believe he was at $50 million for 3 years before the Phils traded him off to the Washington Nats. But Jeanmar Gomez has done a very good job for the Phillies, assuming the role of closer. He didn't come into this season expecting to be the closer for sure, but he's blossomed into this guy that you can sort of count on now. So I'm not so sure that the Phillies should part ways with a pitcher like that, even though there's speculation that Hector Neris may do a good job in the role as well. I just don't see Neris being as consistent as Gomez myself. Sort of on one night and off the next. Very much not what you would want out of a closer at this point. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens at the trade deadline, with the Phillies. Interesting question posed to me tonight, and I was a guest on a podcast that I really love. It's called BaseballPhD podcast with Ed Kasputis, Farley Dillinger, and Mark Rantella. They had me on the show, and I'm going to play a portion of the interview. In fact, I'm going to play the whole interview for you coming up on this edition of Phillies Talk that I did with those guys. A wonderful time, as always, that I enjoy being on their show. So coming up later in the show, towards the end of it. But let's talk a little bit more Phillies, and we're going to take a break. And right after this message, we'll come back and talk more Phillies.
Hi, this is Gary Matthews. You're listening to Fighting Phillies Talk Podcast.
Brewtown Sports is your source for Brewers news and notes. Join Mr. Brewtown as he keeps you up to date on all the happenings of your Milwaukee Brewers and Major League Baseball. Follow the show on Facebook and Twitter, Brewtown Sports. Listen 24/7 at BrewtownSports.podomatic.com.
Hi, this is Gary Mack from Mets Musings, and you're listening to BaseballPodcast.net. You can hear my show and all the other baseball podcasts at BaseballPodcast.net, the home of great baseball talk shows.
All right, everyone, welcome back to this edition of Phillies Talk. And an interesting point to note as well, as I was telling you before the break, I was on another podcast, a podcast that you can find, by the way, on BaseballTalkRadio.com, a collection of over 30 of the best independent baseball talk shows on the internet. So check it out over there. You can listen to the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week stream. But getting back to my point, there was a question posed to me about Ryan Howard by Ed Kasputis from Baseball PhD, and he sort of wanted to know what the legacy of Ryan Howard would be in Philadelphia after he is gone. And no doubt about it, this is Ryan's final season as a Philly. Should he last through the trade deadline or even later than that, of course. But I kind of got nostalgic with my answer. Never was much of a huge Ryan fan, although he did carry this team on his back for several years. He was the heart and the soul of the Phillies looking back at this. And I really got a newfound respect for what Ryan Howard brought to this team. Say what you will about his contract. He's a ball player. He's going to sign a contract. Anybody in their right mind would sign a over $100 million contract, 5 or 7. You'd be a fool not to. So I don't blame him for any of that. None of that was his fault, the money that he got paid. He did get injured during his Phillies career, so take away those injuries, and you may be looking at a Hall of Fame type of player in Ryan Howard if he were to do better with those injuries. Right now, very much probably a no for any Hall of Fame appearance from Ryan Howard, but his legacy with the Phillies will be secure. I'm pretty sure of that. He's been one of the top producers on the Phillies over the years, home run-wise. Gone through some tough personal times, lawsuit by his family, wanting money from him, of course. Some other things that he's been through, the injuries, some of the criticisms that he's received in Philadelphia. But yes, I did become very nostalgic at the prospect that this is your last chance to see Ryan Howard this season in a Phillies uniform. So if you want to get down to the ballpark and sort of soak it in, hopefully he'll be part of the team playing on the field. As I was talking with Baseball PhD podcast, I was telling them that he hasn't been playing all that much, especially in front of his hometown fan. Interesting to see what happens with the Ryan Howard developments as we go towards the trade deadline and towards the end of the season. Well, now let's get into that great conversation that I had with Ed Kasputis from the Baseball PhD podcast. Take care, everyone, and we'll talk to you on the August editions of Phillies Talk Podcasts. And now here's my appearance on Baseball PhD from just a few days ago, talking with Ed Kasputis, Farley Dillinger, and Mark Rantella all about the fightin' Philadelphia Phillies on their great podcast.
A great baseball PhD. Welcome to Rich Baxter from FightinPhillies.com. How are you?
All right, Ed. Thanks for having me on the show.
For our baseball PhD listeners, Rich not only knows a lot about the Philadelphia Phillies, but he's kind of like been a role model for me because he also has another site called BaseballTalkRadio.com, which rotates various baseball podcasts, correct?
Yeah, we have over 32 shows on board right now from around the country and around the world as far as Japan and Europe, all talking about the great game of baseball. So it's a great place to stop by and listen to great shows just like Baseball PhD here.
And Baseball PhD has been a member of Baseball Talk Radio, I think a couple years, 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. One of my favorite shows, if I'm allowed to say that. I always catch your shows, and they're in heavy rotation on the network. So stop on over to BaseballTalkRadio.com.
So let's talk about this year's Phillies. You know, they're not your older brother's Phillies. You know, where's Cliff Lee? Where's Cole Hamels? Where's Jimmy Rollins? You guys are in rebuilding mode, but you're better than I expected you to be. Do you share that opinion, or you figured, now they'll be like this?
Well, they're about 9 games off of 500 right now,
right?
8 or 9 games. So if they could get to 500 by the end of the season, I think it'll please a lot of fans, a lot of the critics. Of course, they tanked the last couple years. And as you said, this is a new Phillies team. 4/5 of the team make under $2 million a year. So that sort of shows you that the newness of the players and the inexperience of them, they're not going to go out there and win a World Series right away, but they have a nucleus of good young players.
And does the average Philly fan see that the organization is coming back up with young players, or are they pouting because they were used to the olden days where you guys had such an unstoppable pitching staff?
Well, the longtime fans yearn for the success, of course, right. But we went through a nice period, a period that you can only dream of maybe 5 years, and it was great while it lasted. This season we got a new GM in Matt Klentak. He's a younger guy out of Stanford College. A lot of new ideas, a lot of new personnel, just a new atmosphere, and he's brought a sense of hope to this team that's been on a downswing for the last 4 years.
And, you know, I've talked to several other podcasters, and they've at least taught me that the role of any good GM, give us a 5-year window where we're competitive and we could win the World Series. That's the dream. If you're just shooting for one specific year, you can run into a hot team like the Kansas City Royals a couple years ago or even last year, and it's like, hey, we were better, but they beat us. So it looks like your old GM, he actually did it, but it's amazing that in that 5-year period, you guys did not win a World Series.
Yeah, it's, 2008, if you want to count that year, we did win the World Series. The glory time for the Phillies really was from 2007 when they eclipsed the New York Mets to win first place in the NL East that year. So from about 2007 to maybe 2011 or so was one of the best times to be a Phillies fan around here with all the pitching aces, as you were talking about at the beginning of the show. But, you know, all good things come to an end. Now,
you still have Ryan Howard, don't you?
Yeah, Ryan Howard, he's probably in his last year as a Philly. He's got a $10 million buyout next year. He may go to a team by the trade deadline this year. It's very questionable, but that's possible.
I mean, if my memory serves me right, Ryan Howard hasn't been Ryan Howard for like the past 3 years.
No, he's his batting average right now is about $160.
Whoa.
Way under the Mendoza line. He does have some home runs. He's always great for home runs, so I think his destination would be a DH somewhere, and he would probably be very good at it. And they pay a DH pretty well, so he's going to be a free agent sooner than later, probably next season, and it'll be interesting to see who goes out and wants to pick him up.
Well, I think he's had a nice, long farewell goodbye to the Phillies. I don't think that they're going to be crying or orchestrating some grand tour for him. At least that's my perception as I stand here in Cleveland.
Yeah, not very much, although he's carved a niche for himself in the Philadelphia area with every home run he hits. Now he's still climbing up the ladder. He's passing some all-time greats. And he was a part of that World Series championship. He's been with the Phillies since the mid-2000s. I think he came up in 2004 originally with the Phils. So he's been with them a long time, and even though he faces a lot of criticism now, he's been part of the Phillies for that success.
Yeah, give me some historical perspective. I remember when I was a little boy, I'd go visit my aunt and uncle in Philadelphia, go to Veterans Stadium and see Greg Luzinski, the Bull, in left field. Has Luzinski hit more home runs for the Phillies than Howard, or has Howard hit more?
I believe Howard has eclipsed Luzinski. He's got roughly, let's see if I can get some quick math here. Luzinski, and of course, as you called him, the Bull, he was a terrific player. He's got 307 career home runs.
Okay.
I believe Ryan's around 350 or so now.
Oh, all right. And I would have thought prior to Howard, was the Bull Greg Luzinski, was he as good as no, you had Mike Schmidt. Here, I'm a dummy. You got Mr. Hall of Fame over 500 home runs, Mike Schmidt. So Luzinski was like you, Lou Gehrig, for power, but Mike Schmidt was the man.
Exactly, yeah. He won games for the Phillies left and right. I believe he has 548 home runs, and I just quickly looked up Ryan Howard's home run total. He's up to 370 so far, so he's still quite a young man at 36 years old this year. If he could go another 4 years, he could possibly hit 500 because he's good for 15 a year or more.
All right, 15 a year gets me. If we're going 4 years, 60 or 75. My gut is I don't see him in the league in 4 years. I don't see him in the league in 2.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's in great shape. He reported to camp looking younger. Of course, maybe becoming a free agent may have something to do with that. But yeah, he's
how many home
runs?
How many home runs does Howard have right now?
He's got 13, but he's had limited playing time. He's been on the bench more than not the last couple weeks, probably the last month. He's been sharing duties at first base. They have a young guy named Tommy Joseph that they're taking a look at first base. He may be a future cornerstone of the Phillies, but yeah, Ryan Howard's been sitting the bench quite a bit lately.
Okay, so he's kind of like the role of like a Jim Thome.
Exactly, yeah. He's
okay. And Jim Thome was with you guys for a little bit toward the end of his career.
Yeah, in fact, they're putting him into the Hall of Fame that they have out there in center field this summer. Probably in a month or so, it'll be Jim Thome night where they enshrine him into the Phillies Wall of Fame.
Wow, a couple years ago, we put up a statue at Progressive Field in Cleveland for Jim Thome, and a lot of people were saying historically, shouldn't we be honoring other people? What about Larry Doby? What about a Lou Boudreau? But after Bob Feller, the second statue was Jim Thome, and we were kind of scratching our heads. So he gets to go to multiple ballparks and get into Hall of Fames. Do you think he's a true Hall of Fame guy for Cooperstown?
Thome, I think he may be. He had the attitude of a Hall of Famer, and he certainly had a great repertoire with the fans. He told me that as he saw it, he knew that the Philadelphia fans were tough, but as long as you hustled and did your best, he understood that you were accepted there. So he was one of the few, what I would call great players.
Right.
He's got 612 home runs career, had a 22-year career overall, and that's sort of gets you somewhere sometimes.
The 600 home runs, in fact, is there anyone other than Barry Bonds who has 600-plus home runs who's not in the Hall of Fame?
Not too many. If you go to BaseballReference.com and look at similar batters, he's surrounded by players like Frank Thomas, Reggie Jackson, Ken Griffey, Mickey Mantle. So that's the caliber player he was.
No, I think the 600 home runs gets you in the Hall of Fame unless you hung out with Pete Rose or Barry Bonds and got in trouble that way.
Exactly.
Yeah, all right. Who's the new Jimmy Rollins? Who's playing shortstop now for the Phillies?
Right now we have Freddie Galvis on board. Kind of a good player, but not a great one. I don't think he'll be the Phillies shortstop going forward. They have a great guy in the wings waiting to come up and take his place. But for now, Galvis is doing a pretty good job at holding that down. It's not an easy spot.
Right.
And he stepped into a nice role. Doesn't make much money again, but he's been with the Phillies for the last few years as well.
Now let's talk about the Phillies rotation. You know, in the olden days, I knew it by heart, even though I was in Cleveland. What's the rotation now for the Phillies?
Well, the Phillies have a younger rotation. They did bring in Jeremy Hellickson, ex of the Diamondbacks, to sort of anchor that young rotation down a little bit. He's been a good thing for the Phillies. He's brought a little experience to the starting staff. He's got some of the guys conditioned to the major league role, so to speak, of a starter. Right. And some of the other guys are very young, you know, their first year, second year, that sort of thing. Vincent Velasquez has been the best pitcher on the Phillies staff so far this year. He's leading the team in wins with 8. Right behind him, I think you'd have to give Aaron Nola the next highest spot. He's leading the team in strikeouts with 111. He was a Phillies first pick out of Louisiana, and he's been great for the Phillies, although in the last couple of weeks he slipped a little bit. His last start was really good. So rounding out, you have Jared Eichhoff, also sort of a rookie type of pitcher, leads the team in earned run average at 3.76 as we're doing the podcast here. So you see 3 different players there taking their different number one spots on the team, and these are the younger guys.
Right.
So each of them have their own record for like ERA, wins, and strikeouts. So
what do you think the plan is? 2 to 3 years for the Phillies to be competitive, or it could be as long as 5?
Well, I would see probably at least 3, maybe 4.
Okay.
They're losing a lot of payroll this year. They started out at about $86 million for opening day.
Right.
Next year on the books, they only have committed about $25 million, believe it or not, and that includes $10 million to Ryan Howard, who won't be there in the buyout. So they have an open checkbook for 2017. It'll be interesting to see which way they start to go with that.
Right. Do you think, are you scared that they could trade anybody with the upcoming trade deadline? Or it's like, no, we got all youngsters and we're not going to deal with anybody?
Well, they have circulated some names around. Jeremy Hellickson is number 1 on that list. He's garnered a lot of teams that have taken a look at him, especially those in the playoff run. The Pirates, the Orioles, even Boston Red Sox have taken a look at him. So if there were anybody to go, I would say it would probably be Hellickson.
And there could be the dream of getting rid of Ryan Howard, but boy, that contract is big to rent a guy. But I don't know. What do you think the odds are that Ryan Howard could be traded by the trade deadline?
I would say not very high, but the Phillies have already paid the bulk of his salary already this year. So whoever would pick him up could be getting a guy that could be explosive going into the playoffs. So I would say it's a team that's going to be waiting in the background somewhere and make a blockbuster move, pick him up for next to nothing, and as you said, sort of a rental.
Yeah.
And, sort of like a Cespedes was a couple years ago. He may bounce to a team for a half a season and then find a home somewhere else.
Right. Lastly, let's talk about your National League East. The Nationals look like they were supposed to look like last year. The Mets, I think, their pitchers are getting hurt, correct?
Yep.
So my gut is it's going to be a national year. Do you disagree or agree?
I agree. I think it's long overdue for the Nationals. They've kind of folded and ended miserably the past couple years. They were expected to do so great. They folded the cards. They picked up a few nice pieces, mainly one from the Phillies in their closer.
Mr. Papelbon?
Exactly. He's not well loved around the Washington area, as he wasn't around the Phillies.
Right.
Because he just doesn't endear himself to the fans, but the man delivers. He became the highest save total pitcher of the Phillies in just a few short years.
Right.
So he's hard to understand. He doesn't make himself very welcome around the ball club.
No. He endeared himself to me a little bit when he got into Bryce Harper's face for not running out either a pop-up or a ground ball. And there's times I think that you have to tell your little pretty superstar, come on, hustle, and maybe you can be like Willie Mays, but you can't be dogging it. And not too many players would have stood up to Bryce Harper as a member of the Washington Nationals.
Exactly, yeah. But I think he lost a bit of respect there as well because he, you don't see that very often. He apologized afterwards. It was sort of a spur-of-the-moment type of action. I was actually watching that game when it happened, and it was just sort of, you don't very much see that.
Right. One of the rules I have for management is that if I ever have to reprimand somebody, I take them into a closed room and talk to them. I don't do it in front of the rest of the team and the people in the stadium.
Exactly. That would be the proper way to handle it.
Right. So that's what happened. So, all right. So it looks like the Nationals are going to win. Could the Mets, even with their injuries, could they still make the playoffs?
I think they can. They have a superstar caliber team. They've had some injuries with the pitching, as you said. Lost a big starter, possibly two with Syndergaard. He's had some arm issues.
Right.
He might be able to make the rest of the season. If that happens, then the Mets will be there. If their pitching falls apart much further, then it'll be a question mark for them. But they're certainly built to go far this year.
I'll give you a crazy thought. It's possible that the Marlins could clip past the Mets at the end if the Mets still have pitching problems. And for some reason, Miami has been playing better than I ever expected them to play.
Yeah, in fact, as we're doing the podcast, they're wrapping up a 4-game series with the Phillies. And, yeah, they have 3 hitters in the top 10 in batting average. They have a Fernandez, a young starting pitcher that's out of this world. They have Giancarlo Stanton, which is home run hitter. They've got a lot of good pieces down there in Miami.
Right, in spite of their ownership. It's amazing. So there's hope for every organization as you get frustrated. I mean, I went to Montreal a couple years ago, and boy, did I hear it about the owner. Well, now that's the same owner for the Marlins. But, yeah, they have surprised me. I would not be shocked if they were the 5th team in, if the right circumstances happened. I wouldn't be shocked. Where in March, I would have been shocked.
Yep, and it's going to be an interesting finish, as it always is every year, especially with the NL East. As you said, there's some question marks, and I like that 2-team wild card that they came up with. It makes it a little more interesting, a lot more combinations possible at the end of the season.
Right. No, I agree. And you know what? I even enjoy that wild card night where you see that sudden death component, and it's like, hey, you don't want that? Win your division. No biggie. Win your division. That's why we want to glorify the division winners, and we'll let the 2 wild cards fight like Siamese beta fish. But I do enjoy those 2 nights watching the American League and National League wild card races. So, Rich Baxter, as I stand here in Cleveland, in fact, for our Baseball PhD listeners, tonight is the last night of the Republican National Convention. Next week, they're coming to you. May you have a peaceful week next week, as so far, knock on wood, we've had in Cleveland. FightinPhillies.com. Rich Baxter, thank you for being on Baseball PhD.
And I thank you very much, Ed.
Go Phillies.